Hey there everyone. So here we are, we're almost finished with the rebuild of the TCMMRC quadcopter, and yeah, there's only a couple of things left to do. We have the receiver to put in, the radio receiver, and also the camera, and then the build is mostly done, and we'll start configuring it up in Betaflight and get it flying. So in this video I'll be putting in the radio receiver. Initially, from the beginning, when I started this project, I was going to put in this Radio Master R81 receiver. It is a D8 protocol receiver from Frisky, and it has been used many times in other of my builds as well, and I do like it. It's been reliable for me. I haven't had any issues with it, but the range isn't great on it. So I decided to jump onto something a little more new, more modern. So what you see here is the EP2 RX by Happymodel, and it is ExpressLRS. So the reason why I wanted to jump onto this is because it does have much better range. So it is a long range system. This one here is an EP2. It has a ceramic antenna, which is tiny, and also the receiver itself is really small. That's one of the benefits of the ExpressLRS receivers. And plus it has more features as well, like you can update it via Wi-Fi and all those things as well. So it's a great little receiver. I haven't used it before, haven't configured it, so throughout this project I'll be learning as well, and I'll be sharing with you what I've learned. So I'm NamFam, let's get into it. Alright, so in the last video I put in the video transmitter, which is sitting on top of the flight controller stack here, and I think we may have done this in the wrong order. I should have put the receiver in first because I'm going to have to solder up the receiver to the flight controller on the underside. So as you can see here in the wiring diagram, you'll see at the bottom there is the radio receiver, and we're going to wire it up to the underside of the flight controller. So you can see that there is a 5-volt pad here on the flight controller, which is going to supply the 5-volt power to the radio receiver, the ExpressLRS, and there is also the ground there as well on the right hand side. And the ExpressLRS has two pads for the signals. One is a RX and the other is a TX. So the RX is where it receives a signal from the flight controller, and the TX is where it actually provides a signal to the flight controller. So the receiver of course receives a signal from the radio controller and provides the signal through its TX pad to the RX pad of the flight controller. There's also the TX pad of the flight controller that provides signals to the radio receiver, and that gives it kind of some of the telemetry between the two systems. So I'm going to wire that up, and I'll have to undo the whole stack, take the video transmitter off, the flight controller off, and then flip it over, wire up the EP2 ExpressLRS receiver, and then put the stack back together. So you'll see me do that now. Alright, so as you can see there, I've taken the video transmitter off, I've flipped the flight controller over so I can see the underside, and I've placed it into the stack with the standoffs there just to hold it in so I can work on it. So I'm just going to tin the pads and get it ready. So based off the wiring diagram, I'm going to tin up those pads. Alright, so I have the flight controller pads tinned up. I'll move this to the side because I'll take out the ExpressLRS receiver now. So here we have it in the packet. And that's all we have. This tiny little receiver is absolutely minuscule. So it's a bit hard. I hope you can see this on the screen and I can zoom in on it. So here we are, we have the ExpressLRS receiver and on the underside as well. So this receiver doesn't have any room for any of the markings to tell you what the pads are, but you'll see it here right now. Alright, so from the diagram you can see that the top side of it, with the antenna in the top right corner, going from left to right, you have the RX pad on the leftmost, you have the TX pad as the second one, the 5V as the third one, and the fourth one is ground there. So just having to remember that, turning it over, of course, on the opposite way you have it as ground, 5V, TX and RX. So I'll just tin those up and get it ready, and then I'll start wiring it up as well, and we can get on to the flight controller. Alright, so I've got those tinned up. I do have this, which is the wiring harness, I guess, from the drone when it came with it. This was actually the receiver cable, so I'm just going to reuse this. I'll just cut it right off. And I know that I'll need 4 of them, so again I might just use one of these. I'm not sure if I have enough length on this, so I just want to check. Yep, if I use one of these, maybe for the RX or the TX pad, should be enough for me to get this onto the frame with the right length. So I'll use these 3 since it's got the ground and the 5V. Alright, so keeping them together, and I might keep it as the same length as this as well. I'll take a green. And I'll just take off a little bit of the silicon, and I'll wire it all up to the receiver. Just going to twist this on here as well, just so that they're all together. Alright, looks alright, and I'll just trim these other ones as well on this harness. So I'll get the yellow one out, ground and the 5V. Turning it over, I might not need this for now. just twisting the ends of these together so they don't fray, and then I'll tin them up, getting them ready to be soldered onto the flight controller and the receiver. Right, just to hold it down. Right, now that they're lightly tinned, I'll just snip off some of the ends. They were a bit too long. Just keeping about just a millimeter will do. Maybe 2. Okay. I'll bring this back with the receiver on it now that we can solder it on. And looking at the wiring diagram as well again, I'll leave it on the screen there. I'll go from the right where we have, actually maybe I'll go from the left, it might be a bit easier. Alright, so I'll know that from the left we have the RX, so I'll solder this yellow one to the RX. Okay, I'll get the green onto the TX for the receiver. Okay, might be a bit awkward that way. And then I'll get the red wire, which is the 5 volt of course, onto that third pad. There we go, and of course the last one here, which is the ground, onto that 4th pad. There we go. So I'm just going to visually inspect that just to make sure I haven't bridged any of those pads. It looks good to me. So that's now ready. I'll twist this up a little bit more. It's nice and neat. I hope you can see that. Get this out of the way. And we have the heat shrink that came with it as well. So I hope this fits. I mean, I'm sure it would. Otherwise I wouldn't have sent it out this way. But if not, I do have my own. Oh, there we go. You can go right over the antenna. So that's what is interesting about this receiver, or some of the other ExpressLRS receivers as well, is that they can have these antennas, which is a little ceramic antenna in there. I don't know if you can see it through the shine of the lights I have here, but maybe you can see it in there like that. It's a tiny antenna, there's no wires coming out of it, and this sits right inside the frame of the quadcopter. So I'm just going to use this because I can't push it in any further. And I want to go in a bit more, just so the wires and the pads aren't exposed, and I can heat this up to shrink it. Alright, so we have that wired up now, and I'll have to wire it up to the flight controller. Okay, so I guess the first two that we can do without really thinking too much about it is the 5V and the ground, so I'll do that now. Just making sure that I do have room and enough wire to solder that up. So I'm going to have to get the black one on the right there, and then the red one onto the left here, and also the RX and TX in the middle. So it's a bit awkward, but let's give it a go. I might move the red one out first, knowing it has to go onto the other side. The black one over here. Alright, so let's get the ground one on. So the ground one is the furthest one on the right here. So since everything is tinned up, I can just go in and get that on. Okay. The next one is the 5V. I shall try to get it around here like this. It's not the best. Perhaps I should have used a longer length of the 5V power. Okay, so I think that might be just enough, just to squeeze in there. I'll turn it around this way. Also got to remember, I'm going to flip this flight controller over as well, so let's see how we go with that. Maybe I'll have to get the 5V not to go inside this loop. Alright, so earlier I wired up the hang on, let me just look at the wiring diagram again. Yeah, so on the receiver I've put the RX as the yellow wire, which needs to go to the TX of the flight controller. So the yellow one will need to go to the TX. And as you can see here, I didn't mention it, that I am using the TX5, which is the UART 5 of the flight controller. So just have to remember that when we go into Betaflight later to configure the UART port for serial RX for the receiver. Otherwise we won't get it to work. So the last one here is going to be the RX on the flight controller, which was the green wire that we soldered up to the TX of the receiver. Alright, so now we've got the receiver installed. I'll try and twist this around, and I'll be placing the receiver just here out the back here. So it's just a bit of enough room, and I'll double-sided sticky tape that and cable tie it down. So let's flip the flight controller over and put the video transmitter on. So I'll turn this back around this way. Get these standoffs back on top. And the video transmitter, plugging it into the same plug earlier that we took it out of, and the video transmitter sat in like this, so wires can go around, making sure I don't pinch the wires, and getting the stack screws on top. the stack screws, but the nuts. Okay, I'll leave 2 in for now, just so we can prepare this. So looks like there's enough, just enough wire. Might get it through the middle actually, a bit easier. There we go. And it will sit to the side, or not to the side, but in the middle there. And I'll get some double-sided sticky tape now to put it in. Double-sided tape, there we go. And placing the receiver on top, we'll get it to sit there temporarily while I get a cable tie. Alright, so just grabbing this cable tie and getting it around the receiver. Alright, so zip ties in. It's quite snug in there. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. And I'll trim off the cable tie there. There's also the cable tie here I forgot to trim off as well, which is holding in the BEC I installed earlier. So it's just sitting in there, and the receiver sitting back here. So cleaning up some of those wires. And there we go. We have the ExpressLRS receiver, the Happymodel EP2 installed and connected to the T5 or the UART 5 of the flight controller. Okay, so now that we have the receiver installed, we can test it out just to make sure that we have everything soldered up correctly and that it's going to power up without burning anything or any smoke. So we've got the antenna plugged into the video transmitter just to make sure it doesn't overheat, and we've got the V-Fly short saver that helps us determine if there's any shorts, and we have a battery, so let's plug that in. And plugging in the battery puts it into standby mode by default, so you can see that there, and pressing this button here delivers the power to the flight controller and all of the components that's wired up. So let's try that out now and see how it goes. Alright, so there you go. There's no smoke. We have it all powered up now. You can see the flashing light of the video transmitter and also the flashing light of the EP2 receiver as well. So we know that everything's powered up okay, and the tones from the motors and the ESC tells us that everything is going okay so far. So there you go. The next thing that you need to do is configure and update the ExpressLRS receiver. So you can do that a couple of ways, and I'm going to configure it now. So yeah, we'll jump into the computer. So we'll set that up. Alright, so over onto the computer side of things, the first thing that we'll need to do is set up Betaflight so that we can actually update the EP2 receiver. So you're probably wondering, how does that work? How do we get to update the Happymodel ExpressLRS EP2 receiver using Betaflight? So the way that it works is there's a pass-through feature from Betaflight that allows you to then update certain components of it if it's wired up correctly. So for the ExpressLRS receiver that we've just installed, we've got the TX and RX pads that are hooked up to the UART 5 of the flight controller. So that allows for Betaflight to then communicate and pass through the information that we've plugged in via the USB port from the computer into the flight controller and then to the receiver. So to get all that working within Betaflight, we'll have to connect the flight controller. So I'm just going to plug that into the computer now and to the flight controller, the USB port. And I've got it to auto connect at the moment, so hopefully once it powers up I can connect. There you go. So here we are, we've got it connected to Betaflight and we can start setting it up. So in the ports tab, we have all of the ports and the UARTs that we have on the flight controller. So here we have UART 1 to 5 and also the USB VCP that allows us to connect. So what we'll need to do here, since we've connected the EP2 receiver to the UART 5, if you recall it's on the TX5 and the RX5 pads, we need to set the serial RX to be on UART 5 here. So once you've set that, we can save and reboot, and it should reconnect because I've got auto reconnect on. So we have we've set it there. So you saw that I already set that up. Alright, so once you've saved and rebooted, the other thing that you'll need to do is go down to the receiver tab and change the receiver serial receiver provider from SBus over to Crossfire. And the reason for that is because the ExpressLRS protocol uses Crossfire as a protocol to talk to the flight controller. So that way we'll need to change this Crossfire, CRSF, and then save and reboot. Alright, so we're back in here now and we do see that it has saved. So those are the two things that you'll need to do in Betaflight, and then jump over to the other configurator tool to configure the ExpressLRS receiver. So now that we've got that configured, we can jump over to the other configuration tool for ExpressLRS. So before we do that, we'll need to disconnect Betaflight. We'll click it there. Let's turn off auto connect as well, just to stop it from reconnecting to it if we do restart the flight controller in any way. So flicking over to this tool here, this is ExpressLRS Configurator. I'll put the link down in the description later so you can download it as well, and it's easily searchable on Google as well, so you can find it and get to the Git hub repo and download a copy of your own. At the moment it is on version 1.5 here, as you can see. So at the time of recording this, the ExpressLRS version 3.0.0 has just been released, so we can actually install this and update the receiver to this version. So let's give that a go. So just going through the ExpressLRS configurator, this will allow you to set a few things about your receiver and then flash it as well. So you can go down here, run a build or a build and flash. I might tell you about the build button here a bit later, just for your information. It's about the Wi-Fi updates that you can do, but for now we're using the Betaflight Passthrough, which is using the flight controller to do the updating. So here we go, just going through these options here. We have the releases. These are the official releases at the moment. 3.0.0 is the latest one. You can show pre-releases as well. I'm not sure if there's any other pre-releases. Nope, there aren't any further newer ones than 3.0.0 at the moment. There is previously the RC1, Release Candidate 1 and Release Candidate 2 of 3.0, but now that we have the full release, we don't have to worry about these two. So we'll turn off the pre-releases and use this version here. So the target for the Happymodel EP2, we'll need to choose the right device category. So just scrolling down here, the EP2 is in the category of Happymodel 2.4 GHz. I've got the 2.4, not the 900, so I choose this one here. In the device, you can then search for the device model, so you can see that it has the Happymodel EP2400RX. There's the EP1 as well, and there's a PP Pro Series, and these are the TX ones, so there's the transmitters. But at the moment we are looking at the EP2. It doesn't say EP2 here, it's just EP2400RX, because there is the EP2 and I think the EP1 dual is something new. I haven't seen that one before, but I think what we need is the 2400 RX, so we'll select that one. So down here there's a flashing method, and I mentioned before we are going to use the Betaflight Passthrough. It does have some information here that you can read, and I think this covers what I had just explained before about Betaflight allowing that pass-through mechanism to let you flash the receiver. There's also the Wi-Fi method as well. I won't be showing that in this video, but I might create another video so that we can go through the different ways you can flash the ExpressLRS receivers. So pass-through, it's straightforward, it's simple, and it's easy, and I'm using that through this method now. So here we come down to the device options. We have the standard mode, and then there's manual mode. Clicking over to manual mode, I presume that you can actually write a whole bunch of things that you can do manually here, but I am no expert, so I'm going to go to standard mode. You have to choose a regulatory domain, so I've chosen ISM 2400. And down here we have the binding phrase. So the way that ExpressLRS works is you have a binding phrase that is kind of like a Wi-Fi password that lets you bind to the receiver to the transmitter. So if the binding phrase is the same on both of the devices for the transmitter and the receiver, then they can communicate together. In this case, I've got the binding phrase as just something that I've put in here randomly is jumper AION underscore ELRS, and the reason for that is the transmitter I am using is the jumper AION ExpressLRS transmitter. I might make a video on updating that later as well. So we have that there. I don't use this regularly, so no one else is going to be able to hijack my quadcopter. I do change this to my own, so you can choose your own as well. On here, I leave these as standard. I am, again, not an expert in all of this, so I'll leave this all as standard. I don't have to worry about them. So yeah, you can read more about them in these question marks as well. Over here on the performance options, lock on first connection, I'll leave it as default selected. Network auto Wi-Fi on interval. So this is part of the Wi-Fi flashing method. If you turn on the receiver without connecting a transmitter, so there's no other transmitter that you've turned on that has the same binding phrase to connect to it, after 60 seconds it will then go into Wi-Fi mode. So I mentioned that the receiver has a Wi-Fi mode, and if you leave it for this interval, you can change it to any interval you like. You can change it to 20 seconds as well. What will happen after this period is it will broadcast its own Wi-Fi network. That will allow you to then use your phone or your laptop to connect to that Wi-Fi network and jump into this address in the browser, and then you can do the flashing through Wi-Fi. So you don't have to connect the USB cable to the flight controller, as I've just done, to then update the receiver. So I'll do that in another video. I won't do it today. You can also set up the Wi-Fi connection to your home Wi-Fi with your home Wi-Fi password, so that you can connect the receiver to that network and then access the receiver through your home Wi-Fi as well. So you can do it that way. I haven't done that before, but there is that option as well. So coming down here, you can then connect to build and flash actually. So in this case, opening this up, we have to go down, and I believe it is this one here, and that will let you build and flash. So one thing to note here is when you do plug in the USB port to this flight controller, it doesn't power up the receiver. So what we'll need to do is plug in a battery. I'm just going to grab a battery now, and while it's being powered up by USB, the flight controller, you can plug in the battery, and then that will allow power to go to the receiver as well. So just going to plug that in, and I'm sorry that you might be able to hear a fan go because I'm turning on a mini handheld fan that I place on top of the video transmitter, and that allows for, whoops, the fan was touching something there, and that allows for the video transmitter to stay warm while stay warm. You don't want it to stay warm, stay cool while I go through this whole process. So at the moment the receiver is flashing, and since we're all connected, we can do a build and flash. So clicking on this, it goes through and then starts to compile all the code. I can cancel this. It compiles all the code that it needs, and it starts to download all the packages online so that it can get all the pieces together and flash the receiver. So we'll see that go through the steps. The first time you do this, it does take some time, about 7 to 10 minutes, but on the subsequent runs, which I'm doing right now, it will do it quite quickly, I think, because all of the things that it needs, the files and packages, it's already downloaded to the machine. So you can see it's writing now, and when you see this writing, it's actually writing to the receiver. And when you see this green bar with success, it means you've flashed it correctly. So there you go. So it succeeded, and that's all you need to do. So now that I have the receiver flashed, I do have the binding phrase in there. I can then flash the transmitter to the same binding phrase, and we should be able to get it all working. So there you go. That's how we flash an ExpressLRS receiver to the latest version 3.0, and yeah. Alright, so there we go. We have the Happymodel EP2 ExpressLRS Receiver installed, and also we've had the ExpressLRS 3.0 firmware, the latest one as of today, flashed to the receiver as well. So that's ready to go. If we flash a transmitter now with the same binding phrase, we'll be able to connect to this. There's a few other things that will need to be configured as well within the transmitter for it to get to work. Things around the aux channels as well, so that you can arm it, but we'll get to that in the later video. So not much left to go in this build, just to have to put in the camera and put in the frame, the stack screws and everything as well, which I'll go through in the next video. But there, we're getting there, almost done. I hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. You get something out of this, that'd be great. But if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I'd like to have a bit of a discussion with anyone who has any issues with this, and if I've done something that doesn't look right, or you have better ways of doing it, happy to hear it as well. I like to get suggestions on how to improve the way I build these. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. So cheers.